This is Craig May, and I'm about to read my short story, The Eagle Hunt, which I wrote last summer of 2023. Please don't scream at me. Andy's mournful request was oddly suited to the vista before him and his girlfriend Anne. An overgrown estate, devoid of human life, a sprawling and dilapidated house at center, and a smaller house adjacent to it. If the small house turned out to be the guest cottage that Andy had rented for the two of them to relax in during the weekend before finals, his trepidation would be more than justified. Anne gazed straight ahead through the windshield. "Did I say anything?" Andy swallowed. In the brochure it was painted. "Really?" "I'm sorry, babe." "Nothing to be sorry about." Anne rolled her head back and forth over her delicate shoulders. "That's what happens when you let a man plan a weekend getaway." All the fantasies that Andy had stored in his imagination, especially for this weekend getaway, appeared to be fluttering off like startled sparrows, and his instinct was to weep. But he manfully pulled himself together and only said, "Oh, come on, Anne, I'm a college student, not an oil baron." "I did the best I could." Anne's eyebrows rose and stayed there. "I never said you didn't." Groaning inwardly, Andy decided to cut his losses and try to salvage what he could of his romantic plans, daydreamed up in great detail through the past week in every class. His hand went to the gear shift, and he turned to look directly into Anne's still widened blue eyes. "All right. You want to leave?" Her mouth opened, but another voice cut through the tension between the young couple. "You the ones looking to rent the cottage?" The woman standing beside the car might have been anywhere from her 40s to 60s. Her colorless hair had likely never seen a beauty parlor, and her gray sack of a dress hung on her raw-boned frame like an old umbrella on its ribs. She looked and sounded neither hostile nor welcoming. Andy flashed the winning smile which had first won Anne's heart at the Christmas ball during their junior year of high school. "Yes, ma'am, we are. I'm Andy Dare, and this is Anne Roth." The woman threw Anne the briefest of glances, then looked with more than a hint of disdain at the cottage. "I'm Farah. This rental thing's my sister's little detail. She's past her due date, though, and so much as a bumped elbow would bust her open, so she can't come out." She held back her tumbleweed hair with one weather-beaten hand as she went on, her long face tightening in its aspiration. "Supper's coming on, and I'm the only one can cook, so I gotta get back. How about I just give you two the key to the place?" Andy turned to Anne, who nodded slightly, then back to Farah. "That's fine, ma'am," he said. "We can take care of ourselves." Farah clapped a tarnished skeleton key into his hand. "Good thing, because nobody else is going to do it round here." A great boom rocked the otherwise tranquil bucolic setting. The youngsters jumped in their seats, and Anne involuntarily reached for Andy's arm. "What was that?" she gasped. Farah cast her disdain toward the densely wooded horizon, tinted reddish gold in the fading afternoon light. You just gotta ignore it," she sniffed. "Somebody got the idea there's an eagle flying around these parts, a real rare bird. Endangered. Menfolk from town think they're gonna each be the one to get it stuffed for the man caves. I gotta go, but drop in for dinner, why don't you? You're both probably hungry, and there ain't no restaurants or nothing round here for miles." "We noticed," Andy murmured. Boo. On the inside, the cottage was surprisingly habitable. The furnishings were rustic and sparse, but there was a comfortable double bed in the rear corner. Andy bounced on it to check, enveloped by a handmade quilt. The rest of the downstairs consisted of a living area and tiny kitchen corner. The upper rooms were locked. Everything in the little dwelling was neat, if old, and reasonably clean, but for stray cobwebs and dust here and there. Even the Victorian-era bathroom, with its clawfoot tub and lavatory pull chain. Not so bad, is it? Andy murmured his question into Anne's hair as his arms slid to clasp her from behind, then crept upward. She stiffened instantly. He rolled his eyes and groaned inwardly again. Combined with her glacial politeness in the car, this definitely boded severe weather in the forecast, and damn the mixed metaphor. Andy fought down an impulse to shout, "What the hell is wrong with you?" which undoubtedly would have spawned an F3 tornado at least, and managed instead to inquire softly, "Hon, what's going on?" Anne turned to face him, and he realized that she, too, was restraining herself. It was a habit that they both held fast to in times of conflict, allowing a brief respite to check their emotions before letting fly. It probably accounted, in large part, for their length of time together. "Well, I'm kind of disappointed," she said at last. "This is far from a resort or even a decent bed and breakfast. It's a shack in Texas chainsaw territory." Andy drew breath to speak, but she was already rolling downhill. Or spiraling downward, if you like. "I've been looking forward to this for over a month. I thought you understood what a quiet weekend, boom, together meant to me. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. I'm a city girl, Andy. I have bus fumes in my blood. From the minute you found this pamphlet or whatever, what possibly made you think I'd want to be dragged out here to this godforsaken, where they probably eat rattlesnake and wash it down with moonshine, and the bathroom looks like Lizzie Borden's?" Andy thought of making the point that the Borden family had no bathroom, and this was considered a main source of dissension between Lizzie and her doomed father, but demurred. She was pulling into the station now, steam evaporating. "I guess I just thought you knew me better. This isn't me. It isn't you either. It was cheap, though. Was that it?" Andy hung his head. "Well, yeah. And the fact that it might be different with the setting." A ghost of a smile appeared on Anne's taut face, and it spread to her tone as she leaned in close to her young lover. "I suppose I can forgive that. But Andy, would you please answer me one question? When you were doing your research for this little trip, were you thinking more about where we would stay, or what we might do there?" His mouth fell open. "Might?" Boom. A bit later, Anne and Andy felt peckish, and because Farah had warned them of the vicinity's lack of restaurants, they decided to accept her invitation to dinner, reluctantly. The main house might have been a full-sized parent of the cottage, its resemblance in furnishings and styles so completely matched it. The couple's timid knock at the side door was answered by a youngish, swarthy man with glossy black hair and a mustache. His heavy accent was unidentifiable. He peered at them suspiciously from under bushy brows as Andy explained who they were. Then he grudgingly stepped aside, his muscled and tattooed arms folded. "You sit here till supper," he more ordered than invited, jerking his head toward a huge, faded Victorian sofa. This formed a line of demarcation between the other ancient living room furniture and the dining area, graced by a long oval table, its once beautiful cherry wood marked and scarred by time. It was laid for 7, with a motley array of mismatched plates and glasses, a huge, tarnished candelabra at center. Andy turned to Anne. "Shall we sit here until supper?" She gave him a look. Boom! There was no doubt that whatever was on the menu at least smelled good, a mixture of warm bread, some type of meat, probably beef, and many spices. As Andy and Anne waited patiently on the sofa, they realized how empty their clamoring stomachs were. They had, of course, been distracted by other appetites heretofore. The surly man had vanished up the winding open staircase at the far end of the room. Through a doorway adjacent, Farah was obliquely visible, bustling around the kitchen at one point, stepping through to light the candles on the table. Presently, 2 teenagers, brother and sister, the likeness was quite striking, wandered down the stairs and plopped in front of the house's only, so far visible, concession to modernity. The television set was old, boxed in ornate faux wood, and put forth a distinctive gray glow when switched on by the boy. They did not acknowledge the visitors on the sofa, but immediately commenced bickering over what they would watch. The State of the Union address on the current channel was out, and the contention focused on whether they would flip to a popular singing competition show, the boys' choice, or a popular teen-oriented evening soap opera, the girls' choice. The dispute was quelled by the return of the decidedly uncivil dark-haired man who ordered them to "turn that damn thing off." As they disgustedly complied, an older woman, exhausted-looking and gargantuanly pregnant, in a massive blue shift with red flowers and a white sailor collar, followed gingerly in the man's wake. She clung to the banister and eyed each foot as it descended while echoing the man's edict, adding, "We have guests tonight, and I won't have you forcing that crap on them." When on the same level as Andy and Anne, she smiled warmly and offered them her hand, along with an invitation to call her Mum. Everybody around these parts has forgotten my real name. She inquired whether the cottage was comfortable and if they had had any trouble finding the place. Yes and yes. She then introduced the temperamental man as Ivo, apparently her husband from the way she tended to refer to him and herself as we, and the teens as her son, Brody, and his younger sister, Barbie. Neither returned Anne and Andy's pleasant greeting, but slumped into chairs at the table. They were joined by Mum and Ivo at the opposing ends, and in response to their hostess's beckoning, the guests took seats on the still vacant side, clasped hands, and smiled at each other. "So what's the bill of fare tonight?" drawled Brody, one hand propping up his shaggy head. He wore an ugly black t-shirt with some gothic-attired rock group on the front, surrounded by sundry demons and wraiths. "Let me guess. Maybe tomato soup from hot water and ketchup, or stewed wild onions plucked fresh from the driveway." Boom! Farah answered this insolence by carrying in a huge cast-iron pot like a witch's kettle, full of something steaming, and obviously the source of the delectable aroma pervading the downstairs. "Homestead stew and dandelion greens," she announced with certain finality, and sat down at Mum's end of the table beside Andy and Anne. "Well, I was about half right," muttered Brody. "I won't eat anything I can't identify," primly groused Barbie. "That stew might as well be swamp water that Farah scooped up out of the wetlands and boiled." "And never bothered to strain," added Brody, for once in agreement with her. Mum slammed down her water glass. "Oh, you two!" she cried aggrievedly. "I don't know why you even come to the table. All you do is sit here and bitch. Your Aunt Farrah's good enough to cook while I'm laid up. The least you can do is shut your mouths and eat it." Brody smirked. "How can I eat it with my mouth shut?" Now it was Ivo's turn to pound the table with his calloused, sinewy fist. "Boy, I told you before, there will be no complaints about the food in this house. In my country, we eat things you would only feed a pig here." Brody calmly met Ivo's angry gaze. "An old pig's welcome to my share." Anne and Andy would later comment that they had never seen a face flash so vividly red as Ivo's at that moment. He shot to his feet and jabbed a finger at Brody, bellowing loud enough to vibrate the dishware. "You will leave this table right now, Villican, and you will do without supper tonight." "Fine. That's just fine." Brody was already up and casually swaggering through the kitchen doorway toward the antique wall phone just beyond. "I got a call to make anyway." Barbie exploded out of her chair, knocking it backward with an echoing thud on the bare wood floor. "Not right now, you don't, you weed munch," she shrilled at her brother. "Mum, tell him to stay off the phone. He's just going to call that greaseball Rick to try and get him to drop the price on that junk heap he wants to buy. They'll be on for an hour, and Mike said he'd call me around supper time." Mum bowed her head. "Barbie, we have company." Brody spun back to face the others, one hand possessively over the phone, even as Barbie clawed for it and singled out Andy. "That reminds me, how much would you take for that car of yours out there?" Andy, caught off guard, fumbled. I wasn't really thinking of selling it." Farrah, who, along with Ivo and Mum, had helped herself to stew and greens, paused in the act of buttering a biscuit and leaned forward to address Andy. "Never mind, young man. He doesn't have money for a car anyway." Boom! That didn't even work. He was offered a job at the gas station in town, but is too damn lazy to take it. Brody's face flamed, yet did not even approach the hue that Ivo's had, and still held. "I won't have Laney see me working in a filling station," he blared. Ivo's fist shook the table again as he glowered at Brody. "Would you prefer her to see you get thrown out on your ass?" "Amen to that," said Farrah. Brody spat at his aunt. "Shut up, Farrah. You should really talk, living here on Mum's charity all these years." "Stop this!" Mum pressed both of her slender hands to her head, knocking a large tassel of wheat-colored hair from its loose bun. "Just stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it! Please, I cannot take any more." Just to add to the mayhem, the phone rang. Barbie leapt at it. Brody, who had stepped away briefly, extended one sneakered foot and tripped his sister, felling her full length. Up she immediately sprang, hell's own fury in her eyes, and screeched, "Mom, did you see what he did?" Brody retreated, slouching toward the stairs, hands stuffed in his pockets. "I did nothing. Go on, answer it, slime trail. Suck face over the phone with Mikey Man." His own sour face twisted into a saccharine simper to match his maudlin tone as he whined, "Oh, Mikey, I was just thinking about you. It's been 2 whole hours since we saw each other at school. Want to know what I'm not wearing?" Barbie flipped him the bird and grabbed the receiver only to slam it back in place. "He hung up," she flung after Brody. "Thanks a lot, you stupid syphilis germ." Her brother laughed with glee as he passed out of sight upstairs. She launched herself after him and disappeared in his wake. From above was heard the slam of a door, then muffled pounding and threats. Anne and Andy had observed the conflagration motionless and open-mouthed, only stealing minimal shocked glances at each other. They had not even yet filled their plates. Farrah now took notice of this and urged them to do so, reassuring them that 'Tain't nothing to fret about. Just the way of the young folks these days. Ivo, amid rapid mouthfuls, barked, "It wouldn't be, if they all got a good thrashing once in a while. That is why my mother will not even come to the table. I tell you, Mum, that boy of yours disrespects me again. I beat him till he cry mercy and cannot walk without help." Mum faced him down the table, her hands flat on its surface. There was a jarring new ring of steel to her voice as she said quietly, "Over my dead body, Ivo." He threw down his fork and mirrored her position. "I do not joke, Mum. I promise you. Do you know what would happen to any young person in my country who behaved like that?" He smashed the biscuit by his plate, flattening it into a puzzle. "There! There! That is what would happen." Mum did not flinch. "That must do great things for your country's morale. Small wonder everybody there wants to move to another one." Farah snickered as she began to clear the table. Ivo scowled at her. "You think that was funny, woman?" She headed for the kitchen with a stack of plates. "Keep your ink on, Ivo. Should know by now I haven't got opinions about anything. Don't have time." Boom! This one was especially loud and close. Everyone jolted, and Mum clenched her fists in agitation. "Damn it!" she protested. "What is the point of all this shooting here? They know there's no eagle flying around. It's too dark to see one anyway. I am so sick of it. I wish they would take all the guns, every one, loaded, and shove them straight. Enough!" Ivo was in one swift motion out of his chair and bearing down on Mum, fists clenched. "You do not know anything. You have not lived in a police state where the guns are all in the hands of tyrants and oppressors." Mum looked up at him without fear. "I don't see any tyrants or oppressors. Except you." Thwack! Ivo's brutal blow knocked Mum out of her chair. She lay on her side, breathing hard, arms protectively holding her mountainous belly. Anne had screamed at the moment of impact without conscious effort. Likewise, Andy was looking down at Ivo from his 6 inches greater height before he even realized that he was standing, his fierce gray eyes locked with Ivo's smoldering black ones. Ivo's squat form was solid muscle, but Andy had his own youthful strength, height, to say nothing of conviction, as well as a black belt in martial arts. The outcome of a fight between the two of them would be hard to guess. At any rate, no one would ever know, for Ivo abruptly pivoted and was gone through the side door, its following slam rivaling the thunder of the gunshots. Andy and Anne sat beside each other on the bed in the cottage. They did not speak. The pair had returned to their quarters only a few minutes ago. After the violence and Ivo's departure, they had helped Mum to her feet. She was blessedly unharmed by the fall, and after thanking and apologizing to them profusely, insisted she could make it back up to her room without their assistance. As they watched her wobbling precariously off, they were joined by Farah, who did not seem at all surprised by the ugly scene. "One day," she had said, arms folded and eyes narrowed, "one day she'll wake up and realize a man's not the answer. Hope it's not too late by then." At her behest, the lodgers had sat back down to eat, although they were no longer hungry. The food was delicious, and they complimented Farah, who attributed her culinary success to using only fresh, homegrown product, nothing out of a box, like most of the population. And then, the cottage again. "Do you want to go?" Soft as it was, Andy's voice jarred Anne visibly. She put a hand to her throat, breathed in and out, then responded to his question with another. Do you? Kind of. I mean, there's nothing we can do here, you know? The mood is definitely shattered. I have to agree with you, Annie. I don't want to spend the night here, and it's not a question of asking for our money back. Oh, no. Heck no. Plus, we've barely even unpacked. We can just throw our stuff in the car and head out. Can you find the way at night? It was hard enough in the daytime. That's because the road isn't marked on the map. Now that I know Legacy Road and the unmarked road on the map are the same, it'll be a cinch. Most people make that mistake. The strange female voice, quiet and scratching like the rustle of bare branches, made Anne and Andy nearly leap free of their own shadows in the twilit room. A woman peered in the open window at them, half obscured in the shifting kaleidoscope of orange sunset and shade. She appeared to be mature, even elderly, by her posture and hairstyle. In her hands was a serving tray of what might be warm cookies, the heavy steam rising from them veiling her features even more. I am so sorry to intrude. A gold tooth glittered in the woman's otherwise undistinguishable grin. Not a smile, but a grin. I am Ernesta, Ivo's mother. I was told you had your dinner at the house, but no dessert. I made some brownies for you. Andy had to force his teeth not to chatter as he replied, Oh, thank you, ma'am. We appreciate that. Ernesta inclined her head. You are most welcome. By the by, you must forgive my son's behavior at dinner. He means well, but the strain of guiding this household is very trying for him. The young people might have informed their sudden visitor that they were disinclined to forgive a man hitting a pregnant woman, or any woman, regardless of how much strain had triggered it. But they both instinctively knew that this would be a waste of their time. Ivo had probably spent a good part of his childhood and youth picking his mother up off the floor. Ernesta continued, You enjoyed your dinner, though, I hope? We did, replied Andy with tolerance while wondering how long the old bat intended to stay. Anne, of course, had to encourage her. Yes, ma'am. It was wonderful. Too bad you weren't there. The gold tooth flickered again. I was there. That's how I knew my son lost his temper. Very awkward pause. Then, just as Andy was about to vanquish Ernesta by a suggestion that he and Anne take a walk, the light of his young life had to encourage her again. That stew, I wonder if Farah would give me the recipe. It is my recipe. For an instant the old woman's eyes, dark and even more intense than her son's, were visible through the steam and shadows. And I will see that you have it. For now, please take one of my brownies. Take 2. They are small. Boom! Anne hesitated, then rose from the bed to accept one of the proffered treats. Careful, said Ernesta as she looked on, approval in her creaky voice. They are fresh from the oven. Young man, you take some too. Andy grimaced as he joined Anne at the window and gingerly helped himself. As he did, his mouth fell open in shock, and his free hand simultaneously covered Anne's as she brought her brownie to her lips. Hun, he said, forcing a casual tone, why don't we just let these cool a little bit and take a walk, huh? I don't know about you, but I'm stuffed right now. Anne looked at him and caught the urgent message in his eyes, but failed to decipher it. Still, she'd had ample time to observe the depth of his innate wisdom and good common sense, when he chose to use them, of course, and so she trusted his judgment. "Okay," she said. "I like that idea a lot. I'm pretty full myself." Ernesta raised her head very high and cocked it to one side in a way that indicated annoyance, but she sounded as gracious as ever when she spoke again. "I understand. I will leave the brownies with you to enjoy when you wish. I caution you not to eat too many at once. They are very rich and may not agree with you." Andy made a great show of taking the tray and setting it on the nearby bureau. There was an obscure hint of irony in his voice as he responded to Ernesta's admonition. "We will definitely heed your words, ma'am, I assure you." The spidery silhouette began to recede from the window. "For one so young, you are very wise," it whispered. "If I may offer a bit of further advice, leave here at once. It may be that you are too wise, which can be dangerous. This is not what you were sold." Boom! She was gone, as though she had never been there. But for the platter of hot brownies, was solid evidence otherwise. Andy and Anne turned to each other in unison. "What the hell was that?" He gestured feebly toward the window. She did not seem to know whether to frown or giggle. "You got me," she finally said, brow furrowed and her eyes comically round. "What was with you in the brownies? Why didn't you just take a sniff?" "All I smell is brownies. They smell terrific. Take another sniff." "That's Mary Jane." "No!" "Yep. Trust me, babe. Those brownies are chock full of pot." "I don't believe it. An old lady like that? And how do you know what pot smells like anyway? You told me you never did drugs." "Yes, and I told you the truth. But I know weed when I smell it." "I just absolutely cannot believe this." She put in a hefty dose, too. No wonder she told us to go easy on him. After just one, we'd have been dancing naked in the moonlight. Two, and we'd have been worshipping the moon with wood sprites. "What's that?" "What's what?" "That thing on the windowsill. Did she leave that there?" "Wasn't there before she dropped by." "Oh, it's a purse. She left her purse here. Must have had it over her shoulder." "Hey!" "What, Andy? Don't make me jump here." "Look inside. Like to guess how much there is?" "Those are $1,000 bills. I've never seen one before. And hundreds, and 50s, the whole treasury." "You know what's happening here, Annie. This is a pot plantation. Who knows what else? But I'm thinking Ivo and his mama run it, and the others are just loaning them the land. It's a perfect gig, miles from civilization. They certainly don't show off their wealth. To outside eyes, they're just a decent, hard-scrabble country clan. Except to us. I don't know why the old witch let us in on the secret, but boom!" "I don't know either, Andy, but I want to get out of here. Now." "We are. Let's grab our stuff. No need to say goodbye." As Anne and Andy left the cottage, valises in hand, the bizarre orange dusk flashed through the dense trees one last time before surrendering to night. It engulfed them like a great search beam, as though they were wanted criminals trapped by the police. The moment assumed a distinct irony when a uniformed man sporting a badge, big of belly, his rather small head nearly lost under his Stetson hat, stepped into the searchlight with them. Both youngsters froze. Andy cursed himself for deciding to put the purse full of cash outside the door of the main house instead of leaving it in the cottage. The hand holding it immediately began to sweat. "Evening, young folks," hailed the officer. His badge identified him as sheriff when he drew near. "You coming or going?" "We're leaving," said Andy, his voice not his own. "We rented the cottage for the weekend, but we—" "Oh, so she did it then," the lawman mused. He casually lit a cigarette, the flame illuminating his diminutive, almost boyish features. "Mum told me she might put the place to let. I told her it'd be a lot more headache than it was worth, but you can't tell her nothing. I'm Sheriff Crookstick. You kids get here tonight? And you're leaving already, huh? Well, why's that?" Anne offered the first explanation that flared in her frantic mind. "Bedbugs. The cottage is full of them, sir." Andy nodded vigorously. "We're heading straight to a laundry, one of those all-night ones. All our clothes need washed, even the ones we have on." Sheriff Crookstick glanced over his shoulder at the cottage. "You're kidding me. As fastidious a housekeeper as Mum is?" The young people did not know how fastidious Mum's housekeeping was in her more mobile days, but for now bedbugs were their story, and they were sticking to it. Crookstick frowned as though deductive reasoning hurt him, then seemed to reach a breakthrough. "Oh, yeah, that's probably 'cause she's been laid up with the baby all these months and couldn't get in there to clean. Oh, sure, I never thought of that. I sure never did. Well, that must really suck for the both of you. I was a kid myself, more recent than you'd ever guess. Had this girlfriend I'd take to my dad's cabin in the mountains. We'd bring us a couple bottles and have us a fine old time. Why, I remember one time when we got our— Hey! Was that you got there, son?" Sheriff Crookstick's beady eyes were fastened on the large black purse that Andy held. Despite the sudden grinding tension of the scene, both Andy and Anne were grateful for the interruption that the sheriff's sharp inquiry had afforded in his reminiscing. Without hesitation, Andy held out the purse to the authority figure, he being the first one they had found, and Andy having no intention of shielding their hosts from whatever catastrophe they might face through discovery of the cash. "We found it in the cottage, sir," he said with quiet candor. "A lady from the house, Ernesta is her name, she brought us brownies just before we headed out. She left her purse behind. We were just taking it to the house. There's a lot of money inside. We never touched it. On our honor." The sheriff opened the purse and gazed inside with an almost religious rapture. Presently he snapped it shut and said dismissively, "Don't you worry none about this. I'll take care of it." "What's that, Sheriff?" A smooth, melodious voice wafted from the deepening darkness prior to its owner's noiseless emerging from it. He was very tall and thin, dressed in a rather old-fashioned black suit and clerical collar. His broad-brimmed hat cast a shadow which failed to fully obscure his large eyes, so deep-set that he appeared to be wearing silent movie makeup. His puckered mouth pinched even tighter in a unique representation of a smile as he addressed Crookstick once more. "Remember, love thy neighbor, and so many of your neighbors are greatly in need of love. But love comes at a price, as you well know." The spindly figure held out a long, bloodless hand, palm up. The sheriff stepped very deliberately away from the hand and clutched the purse to his ample man-boobs. Reverend Harold, he snapped with nasal disdain, you can sniff out a buck faster than a bloodhound after a bitch in heat. Well, you ain't getting none of this. I seen that collection plate Sundays, and I see you cozying up to all them fat cats that drop by City Hall. And then I see you driving a big old shiny Cadillac, and hear about you buying a big house in the country with a golf course and swimming pool, when you've said more'n once in your sermons that you can't even swim. Anne and Andy had been looking on uncertainly at the confrontation. As it raged ahead, they gazed at each other, slack-jawed with a mixture of shock and amusement. Reverend Harold primly closed his eyes and raised his chin. The good Lord rewards his most faithful followers in this world and the next, he intoned. Bullshit! Roared Sheriff Crookstick. Nobody needs them kind of rewards. You take in thousands through campaigns and fundraisers that'd put a politician to shame for all kinds of causes, and I don't see no hospitals being built. I don't see no affordable housing going up, so where's all the dad-burned money going? Reverend Harold looked sideways at the angry civil servant. To missionaries, of course, in darkest Banahana, Zimbabwe. The sheriff spat in disgust. That figures. When we got homeless kids on the streets in this very town with no parents, hooked on drugs, stealing and selling their bodies to stay alive. Where are the dollars and goddamn fundraisers for them? The Reverend winced and jumped as though stung. Then he placed his bony hands before him in an attitude of prayer, turned his back, and walked off into the night, singing softly, Love lifted me, when nothing else could help, love lifted me. He had hardly been obscured by the dark when Sheriff Crookstick turned officiously to the young people, the purse still hugged in his brawny arms like a friend who had just saved his life. It was a pleasure meeting you both, he said. Drop in any time. Our hound's hospitality will be at your disposal. Now, forgive me, but I have business to attend to. Good night. As the portly figure marched off, leaving only astounded silence behind, a sudden angry resolution spread over Anne's innocent features, and she stepped forward. Hey, wait a minute, sir. Crookstick turned impatiently. Andy stared at his girlfriend, taken aback. Yes, young lady? The lawman's eyebrows had risen out of sight beneath his Stetson. Anne pointed to the main house, a menagerie of disconnected angles in the last flicker of sunset. What about them? She demanded. Aren't you going to share even a smidge? They need it. You can tell they're barely getting by. It's none of my business what kind of arrangement they have with you, but after doing all the work, don't you think they deserve even a teeny piece of the pie? I mean, they have to resort to raising dope so they can eat. The sheriff regarded her silently for a moment, then, as if she had told him the joke of his life, he erupted into wheezy laughter that made his vast belly bounce and ultimately segued into a deep coughing fit. When he was able to speak again, he patted the purse and said hoarsely, Miss, Miss, this is my tiny piece of the pie. They bake once a month. Or brownies, if you like. I gotta fund my department somehow, don't I? He turned away again and vanished, still chuckling. By this point, the only light in the little clearing came from the main house's lower windows, and just one on the second floor. Andy focused on Anne, his handsome face distorted with pique. Why did you question him like that? Because it bothered me. She still sounded openly confrontational instead of her usual passive-aggressive lilt when face down. Anne, he's the sheriff. He could have arrested us for asking too much. How often do people visit little ghost towns like this and something goes wrong and they just disappear? In horror movies or in real life? Both! I don't know, Andy. But has it occurred to you that we're on the verge of graduation from college, and we've no practical experience with life? How things really work? What are you talking about? We've both had jobs. We've helped with outreach. We took that trip to volunteer after the earthquake. That's not the same. All of that was by choice. We were on the outside looking in. Or, no, we were on the inside, safe, just tossing little care packages out the window. I like you being all philosophical. Turns me on. What do you say we get the hell out of here, get back to Civ, grab some booze and snacks, and crash at the first motel we come to? Cheap motel. Extremely cheap. You don't get it, do you? Oh yeah, I got it. I got that you sound like some softy social worker making excuses for people who choose to deliberately fuck their own lives up. I'm not making excuses, but some people have their bad decisions made for them. Boom! A terrible cry rang out after the last shot, a guttural, agonized wail of terror and panic. It was followed up by more cries, lacking the volume of the first, but equal in intensity. It came from the porch. Andy stared wild-eyed in the direction of the shadow-thick front stoop area, then dropped his valise and ran toward it. Anne followed suit. The dim light from the nearest window defined a hint of an ancient wicker rocker and the silhouette of a figure in it. As Anne and Andy's vision adjusted, the figure developed the features of an aged, wasted man. A black and white bandana tied over his head, his clothing nondescript. His arms flailed as though repelling an unseen attacker, and he continued to howl a few words now decipherable. "Joey!" he screamed. "Joey!" His hands went to his head as though shielding it. "Run, Joey! Go back with the rest! Do as I say! Run! Leave me be! That's an order from your commanding officer, goddammit! Joey! No!" The hectoring voice cut off as quickly as it had burst forth. The man sprang forward, hands crushing the rocker's arms, his eyes like those of one possessed. He panted as though he had run for his life from a great distance. It was a full 10 seconds before his breathing leveled, and he seemed to take note of the two onlookers before him. "Who you?" he croaked. Andy's hand went to his temple. "Nobody, really," he said with irony. My girlfriend and I, we rented the guest cottage for the night. We were, gonna take a walk, and we heard you. You must have had one hell of a nightmare." The man, still gasping, nodded slightly and fell back in the rocker. "Not a nightmare," he said in a stronger but gravelly voice. "Memory. You're too young to understand. Thank Christ you are." Andy crouched on the steps in the silence that followed, watching closely what he had quickly identified as a former soldier. Anne surprised him by climbing to stand next to the rocker. "Is there anything we can do?" she inquired gently. "Anything you need, sir?" The soldier offered a weary half-grin, and it was evident that he had once been a very attractive man. "Nobody's called me that in a coon's age. Name's Jed. I'm Mum's cousin, resident black sheep. And sure, I'll take a fifth of Jack and some Lucky Strikes." "Nah, I'm just BSing you. So you rented the cottage, huh?" "I was after Mum forever to let me fix her up so I could live there, pay rent and everything, no go. Was convinced I was a freeloading wastrel and hopeless alky who'd be a bad influence on her kids. As though any influence could make them two worse." This Andy and Ann fully agreed with, and said so. Jed slipped a flask from his faded army jacket, muttered, "Excuse me," and took a generous gulp. Next he fished in another pocket for a crumpled pack of cigarettes, shook one out, and lit it. "Last one tonight," he groused. "Almost the end of the month. Gotta ration every damn thing." Andy said earnestly, "If we had our own to share, you'd be welcome." "Much obliged to you." Jed blew smoke and tapped ashes into a rusty watering can. "The fam don't even want me at the table. I eat out here. It's better. Anyway, I can't stand them teenage terrors, that hothead Ivo or his old lady. You had the misfortune to meet 'em all? Ivo brought all kinds of trouble here with him when he moved in with Mum. Her hubby took off, nobody knows where. Nothing was ever the same. Ivo started claiming all the perks and privileges that should be mine. I mean, what the hell? I'm family and I belong here. One day, he's gonna push me too far and one of us is going to the morgue. I swear on my service medals. Farrah, she's all right, and even Mum's not bad when she's alone. I wouldn't be here at all but for seeing a lawyer in town trying to get me retirement along with disability benefits now I'm of age, so I can move out of the roach commune I live in now. Family never felt I even deserved disability because they can't see where I got mangled." He tapped his forehead. "But I'm mangled, all right. You heard." Anne laid a hand on his shoulder. "We wish you the best of luck in your case." Jed started as from an electric shock at her touch. "Begging your pardon, miss," he said, "but I have to ask you not to do that. It's my reflexes from combat. People have gotten hurt, coming at me from behind." Boom. Anne wanted to check on Mom. Just feel a lot better. So they entered the house again through the side door. She glanced back once, where a lone moth battered its chalky wings against the screen, then with meaning at Andy. "That's exactly what I was talking about," she said. "He never had a choice. He was doing what he had to do." Andy nodded, grudgingly. "I have to say I like him a lot more than the rest." The television was on in the living room. Brody and Barbie were gazing glassy-eyed at an old Technicolor musical. "I love those fireworks," murmured Barbie. There were no fireworks on the screen, just a chorus of female dancers climbing a great white staircase. Brody snorted. "You're fried, sis. Alls I see is a big old snake playing an accordion." Anne and Andy noted the half-empty plate of brownies on the coffee table and made for the curving staircase. The upper hall was lit only by the weak yellow glow spilling from behind two half-open doors. Hand in hand, the pair approached the first. Andy found himself wishing that his girlfriend was not so mature and compassionate. He would have been surprised to know that she was wishing the same of him. "How could he let me talk him into this?" she thought. All at once she stifled a scream. There at the end of the corridor was a dark figure with a pale, bony face. Anne clung to Andy, his arms enfolding her as it glided toward them. It was Farrah. "There's been a death in the family," she near whispered, one knobby finger at her thin lips. Before either guest could seek details, she drifted past them and opened another door. "It's not Mom!" Anne's voice was thin with horror. Is she all right?" "Dr. Stone is with her." Pharaoh replied, not looking back before the door firmly shut. Andy and Anne gaped at each other in the near dark. The only sound was the faint clatter of a tap number playing on the television below. Without discussion, the couple gingerly crept to peer inside the first lighted door on their left. A huge candelabra, either that from the dinner table or its twin, cast wavering shadows over the woman lying on a bed, shriveled hands neatly folded at her waist. "It's Ernesta," Andy said, his head shaking in denial. "It's got to be. Her hair is the same. What happened? What the actual," Andy, said Anne, "is going on here?" he finished. "Did she eat too many of her brownies or something?" At that moment, a deep groan of distress reached them from the other door. As one, they hurried for it. Mum lay in another bed, now dressed in a voluminous nightgown, the comforter pulled down to expose her belly the size of a small planet. Resting on it was the hand of a tall, officious-looking gray-haired man in a dark suit. One eye sported a monocle. The other squinted at the gold pocket watch he held in midair. "We're almost home," he finally said in a brusque, impersonal tone. Mum, who was puffing like a plump steamboat, groaned again, following that up with some creative cursing of men in general and the baby's father in particular. Andy guided Anne away from the door. "She's fine with him there. Must be the doctor. I think we should go now." "Please," said Anne, laying her head on his shoulder. In this fashion they proceeded to the stairs, then halfway down, whereupon the doctor came charging from behind, black bag in hand, almost knocking them over. "Do not bother me again," he shouted. "Patients without insurance do not receive house calls. You want treatment? You come and wait like everyone else, and after all my paying clients have been seen, I might give you a few minutes of my valuable time." He was at the side door, about to yank it open, when Andy was able to speak. "Are you kidding me?" His voice was several octaves higher than usual. "You're walking out on a woman in labor because she doesn't have insurance?" Anne's voice was nearly a screech. "You would let her possibly die?" Boom! Dr. Stone did an about face and glared at the two protesters who were in turn looking daggers at him. "That is absolutely right," he declaimed. "I do not work for free, and neither would you." Andy flushed and took a few steps down. "Well, Doc, I happen to know these people are well within their means to pay. They might have to give you cash, but there's no question that they've got it to give." The good doctor bestowed upon him the most withering of withering looks and snapped, "I don't want their kind of cash," after which he adjusted his monocle and was gone. Andy hurled a nasty epithet after him, but Anne was already pulling him back up the stairs. "Come on, we have to take care of her." How?" Mum was now sitting up in bed, her bright brown hair disheveled, concealing her face. In her arms lay a tiny form wrapped in a blanket. Anne gasped with joy. "Andy, it's okay. She did it on her own." The matriarch slowly turned to look at her would-be delivery guides. "Too late," she said in a hollow monotone. "It's dead." Anne felt her legs nearly give way. Andy felt this as well and quickly supported her. "Oh, no," she moaned. "Oh, dear God, how? What happened?" Mum's hair formed a hood which eerily obscured her face. "It was too good to be true. she replied in the same soulless timbre. "It never had a chance. Not from the very start. If a thing is too good to be true, how can it survive?" The young people could only watch, stricken, as Mum's body then suddenly went limp and she collapsed back against the pillow. Andy and Anne reacted by doing everything that might reasonably be expected of anyone in their situation. They checked Mum's pulse, which was fine. Then, by mutual consent, they gently lifted the silent bundle from her arms and laid it on an overstuffed chair nearby. Finally, they covered it with Mum's discarded blue, red, and white dress that she had worn at supper time. Neither uttered a word as they descended the stairs together. Barbie and Brody lay senseless before the television, upon which the evening news was now playing, its current focus the upcoming presidential election, and the pleasantly surprising surge of interest being taken in it by the younger generation. Andy flipped on the porch light as they left the house, its radiance allowing them to easily find their valises in the weedy lawn. Jed's rocker was empty. The gunshots had stopped, replaced by the peaceful chirping of crickets. When they were settled in Andy's car, doors securely locked, and dome light on for easy reading of the map, he started it up and switched on the headlights. He and Anne both cried out. Approaching the car, in the harsh glow of the high beams, was a bearded man in a hunting cap and battered plaid coat. In one hand he carried a rifle. Anne and Andy's wild-eyed stares at each other conveyed not only their shared petrification, but a lightning-clear message. It really is just like a friggin' horror movie. Shrinking back in their seats, they could only wait for the man to fire upon them, if that were his intent. Instead, he ambled round to the driver's side of the car. With great misgivings, Andy rolled down his window exactly 1 inch. "Evening," the hunter said in a voice much friendlier than might be expected. "I'm guessing you two rented the cottage from my wife." The youngsters exchanged another glance. His wife? The man tilted his cap back, revealing a rugged but honest face. "You both look nervous," he chuckled, looking at the rifle. "Don't let this spook you. I was just out doing some hunting this afternoon. Didn't get nothing to show for it. None of us did. Story about that damn eagle was more'n likely told after its teller had too many brewskis. Mum's not gonna be too happy with me, but sometimes a man just needs a break. And that Ivo, I take it you had the misfortune of meeting Ivo. I did enforce an understanding with him tonight, believe you me. I don't care so much if him and his ma live here. I know it's better than where they come from. But they gotta remember that Papa," he jerked a thumb at his chest, "and his family are always gonna come first. It's only right. Oh, and the kid, Mum have it yet?" The interval required to absorb all this delayed any response from the young couple for what seemed an age. Then Anne leaned forward and spoke levelly and sincerely to Papa. "Mister, all we can tell you is that your wife really needs you now. She's needed you for a long time. Please, in the future, stay home with her where you belong." Andy's eyes flashed up at the absent patriarch. "Your 2 older kids need you, too. For them, it may not be too late. But I have my doubts." Papa frowned and lowered his head. "Doesn't sound like the news I was hoping for," he muttered presently. "It's the news you need to hear," said Anne. It's the news they all need you to hear," said Andy. After a moment, Papa looked up at the house, his expression resigned and somber. Then he walked off toward it without a word. As they watched him go, Anne queried softly, "Do you think there ever really was an eagle?" "They believed in it," replied Andy, "or wanted to believe in it. The baby was real. Poor thing, they expected too much from it and didn't give enough to it. Or stopped giving. I wonder if they'll try again for another one. It may not be too late. But again, I have my doubts." The Eagle Hunt by Craig May.